is Lady Margaret?
So she was the daughter of the 7th Marquess of Londonderry, but by all accounts a black sheep of the family. She had brothers and sisters, but she was, I feel from the research I did, she was a bit of a rebel and didn't necessarily get on with her dad. Hence she lived in what would have been quite a remote area. When she bought our house, it would have been quite remote, and she spent her time between there and London.
Where is Lady Margaret's house?
So it's in Rathmullan, north of Rathmullan, just past Drumhall House, round the Bad Bend, and it's there on the right hand side. So Lady Margaret owned all of that land from there all the way back into Rathmullan. So she owned Drumhall House as well, but she never lived in it. I get the impression again that she didn't. She came from a lot of money and wealth and servants, but she liked to live, in a more meagre house than Drumhall House, and keep herself to herself. Apparently she used to do these dinner parties, and everything served at the dinner party was foraged from either the beach at Kinnegher or from her garden, so different types of mushrooms and all sorts, and the entire dinner was all served from food that she foraged herself. Sounds like a very creative woman. I just go to Tesco. There's that many snowdrops, like there's blankets of them across the garden that she must have planted them, but she was a huge gardener. But there's some rare plants in our garden, because then the people who bought the house after Lady Margaret were also keen gardeners. I feel like we're letting the side down on the garden front, but we need to up our game. But she's some amazing plants in that garden, and apparently quite rare plants that don't grow usually in Ireland, that she's managed to cultivate, and they're living quite happily there now.
Do you know where she was buried?
I don't know where she's buried, but she died in her, so she had an apartment. This is, what the wealthy aristocracy will have, their country pile, and then they have their city pad. So her family owned a home in London called Londonderry House, which is on the corner of Hyde Park Corner and is actually the site where the Hilton Park Lane is built. So her family pad in the city was built there, was knocked down, and that Hilton was built in the 60s, sometime late 60s, very controversial because it was the tallest building in London for a long time, and from the top of it you can see into the Queen's back garden, so it was very controversial, that building. After that, in terms of London, but she had an apartment on Sloane Street, which is just down around the corner from there, and that's where she was when she died. And she died without issue. So I was telling you earlier what that meant, wasn't I? It meant that she died without having any children. I feel like she looked very glamorous. A second time she got married in a place called Caxton Hall. She got married there, and that's in the 50s and 60s. It was the place where all the celebrities all got married. So she'd very glamorous, wedding, and that was a wedding that her dad didn't want her to do, so she went against his wishes. So I think there was a little bit of a falling out there.
Can you tell me about Lady Margaret's dad?
I don't really know anything about him. He was the head of the Air Corps, I know that, so that would have been the RAF, we know it as now, the Royal Air Force. It was called the Air Corps when it was first set up, just before World War I. Somebody can correct me, but so he was head of that. But another funny fact, Lady Margaret had her pilot's license before he did. So he was head of what is now the Royal Air Force, and she managed to get her pilot's license before him. So I bet she rubbed his nose in it. I would. That happened to me.
We know.
I'd make sure my dad knew all about it. He had it for a couple of years, and at that point it was all one. So where the lodge is now was a barn, and then there was our house, and then Michael's house next door to us, that was Lady Margaret's art studio. So it was then split, and the art studio was sold separately to the house and the barn, and then the Steeles bought it. So they were a very entrepreneurial family who set up a very successful duck farm. Started off with 10 ducks or something like that in Monaghan, and built a multi-million pound enterprise out of it. And then the fireplace in what is now our guest bedroom, that was our bedroom when we first moved in, that has some like alcohol, it must be alcohol because it's damaged the marble rings and some burn marks. So I imagine I can envisage Lady Margaret sitting there on a winter's evening, when you've got Storm, Jocelyn or some of those, with a fire in that room with her brandy and her cigarette, having a grand old time to herself.
If you were to meet Lady Margaret today, what would you ask her?
Oh, I'd love to know, because I'm so interested in building work and all of that, I'd love to know how she planned out the house and the garden, what her vision was for it. But ultimately, I think she was way ahead of her time, living on her own as a lady, at that time. And the fact that she got married and divorced twice and reverted to her maiden name just makes me think she was a bit of a rebel. I think she'd have been a really interesting character for a night out in the pub.